Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. We're going to be getting started in just a few moments. We're going to wait for a few more, give everyone a few minutes to join, and then we will get this promptly underway. Good morning or afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. And thank you to Cheryl for kicking us off with the use of our chat function on the webinar today. My name is Taylor Mann. I'm the co-founder and CEO of. I want to welcome everyone here today to talk about the role of mobile devices and how we can keep patients and staff safe, both in healthcare and beyond the healthcare environment. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Carolina Koutras, who is our Director of Clinical Research. And the topic for today's, or the agenda for today's webinar, is to start by talking about who is CleanSlate, why am I here talking to you, everyone, about this today. We're going to go into the device usage in hospitals and how this has really been increasing over the past several years and where we see it going in the future. We're going to talk about the clinical risks from mobile devices, and then go into a bit about the CleanSlate solution and how we are actually solving this problem. Before we go into that, I do want to note that there is going to be a Q&A at the end. So we're going to leave about 5 minutes. So please, feel free to, as we're going through the presentation, any questions that you have, feel free to please put them in the chat box, and we will get to as many of those as we can by the end of the presentation. Any that we can't get to, we'll make sure that we follow up directly after the webinar. So without any further ado, I want to go into our session today and start with a bit of an overview of who we are and why we're here today. CleanSlate UV has a mission to create simple, effective, and proven solutions for eliminating pathogens on mobile devices. We were founded in 2014, and we fully commercialized our product in early 2018. And we are now the global leader in device hygiene. We're deployed in over 300 hospital systems across the world, including as well as a number of non-hospital, major non-hospital applications. We have our headquarters in Toronto, Canada, as well as offices in Buffalo, New York, and team members throughout North America and partners around the world. Now, what we're here to talk about today is mobile devices and the fact that they are everywhere, from cell phones to tablets, being used at the bedside or at patient check-in, through to ID badges and stethoscopes, and yes, even still pagers. We're all too familiar with seeing those in hospital environments, seeing pagers on the unit floors. These devices have become ubiquitous throughout the healthcare settings. And by 2022, 97% of nurses will be using a mobile device in their daily work. Now, this is incredibly important because devices obviously present, and the range of mobile devices obviously present a huge opportunity in healthcare. I think everyone here has probably seen the changes in, the step changes in their workflow over the past 10 years from mobile devices. But we are really entering a phase of the market where a lot of the innovation happening, especially in digital health, is really occurring at the application level and is being powered by the increasing number of facility-owned and staff and visitor-owned devices. Now, what this means is that devices are being used at patient check-ins. So right now, a lot of hospitals and a lot of clinics are using devices. You can actually check in or do COVID screenings before you get to a facility or as you enter a facility and ensure that you're in compliance with their COVID protocols. And you'll have a lot of facilities using visitor or patient-facing tablets to verify things like medical records and insurance information. You have platforms that have become critical to the flow of information within the hospital. These can range from the Vocera badge systems that are used by a lot of facilities through to smartphones that may run the Volt system, or other communication systems that really make it easy to communicate across a whole range of departments. And lastly, you have patient monitoring and patient care enablement tools that really extend not only the workflow of nurses and physicians, but of support staff and administrative folks throughout the entire patient care journey. Now, one of the things that we heard when we were starting out with CleanSlate was just how much of an issue the growing number of devices were across the range of departments. And this is one of the early quotes we got from a NICU manager, which was really expressing the frustration that we heard in a lot of areas of healthcare about, which at that time was the main solution, which was simply trying to ban devices and saying, this is just not something that our staff should really have to spend time telling parents on. It's also, particularly in the context of a NICU or a PICU, consistently heartbreaking to tell someone, hey, you got to put that phone away, when it's really their only link to the outside world, especially today when the number of guests or the number of visitors is actually being metered. That's really, really important. So going into what we were actually hearing as a company in the challenges that these were creating and the challenges that this growth in devices was creating is that, first of all, you have staff members who, as part of their routines, were being required to use chemical wipes 10 or more times a day. Not only was this is leading to a lot of folks, the chemicals getting under their hands and therefore having to wear gloves every time they do this, which is another really exciting step that you have to take to every time you need to sanitize a phone. But the contact time to kill stuff such as MRSA and C. difficile and the really dangerous pathogens that are a concern in a lot of departments, they have a 3-minute contact time. So as you can imagine, a lot of people don't really abide by this. The second thing, when they were trying to ban things, a lot of these bans were just futile. I've personally been on a lot of shadow shifts where I'll be following an infection control manager who's following a nurse who will walk while using their phone through 2 doors that say no cell phones allowed in them. It's not particularly effective, especially in today's day and age. And then lastly is just the visitor protocols. And the fact that now not only do hospitals need to figure out how to sanitize their own devices, but they need to make sure that visitors and patients have an easy way to sanitize their own devices. And the way this was being solved was, some departments putting phones in bags, which creates a lot of waste and, would isolate the phone, but then would just create another vector of transmission, which was the bag. You'd have cell phone bans, which, were, I think anyone here who's tried to do that can attest to how ineffective and difficult to enforce that is. And then lastly, you'd have things like screen-safe wipes coming up that would act as a way to clean the surface of the device, but don't actually have the properties. They don't actually achieve a hospital grade level of disinfection, so they're not going to kill things like C. diff. They're not going to tackle MRSA effectively. So really not a good solution for any kind of non-consumer or non for any kind of non-consumer application. So pivoting from that, I want to talk and I want to bring Dr. Carolina Koutras into the conversation and really talk about what this growth in mobile devices really means from a data standpoint. So what are we actually seeing from the market, and what are the actual clinical risks that creates? So Dr. Koutras, you want to give a test on the mic?
Sure. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
You're great. I'll let you take it away.
Great, thank you. My name is Carolina Koutras, and I'm the Director of Clinical Research here at CleanSlate. I'm going to talk briefly about the data around mobile device hygiene in healthcare and why it matters. If you look at the clinical research studies on these devices and hygiene in healthcare, there are some really interesting findings from the early studies where they went into the operating room and worked with an anesthesiologist and asked them to have their normal hand hygiene routine and then touch their cell phones. And after swabs, researchers found a 10% rate of contamination with human pathogenic bacteria, including MRSA and VRE, to other studies that actually show that 1 in 4 mobile devices from healthcare workers are in fact contaminated with these pathogenic bacteria. It's actually very concerning. Some studies even went into looking specific units within the hospital. So for example, in the neonatal intensive care unit, if you look across 6 different studies, they will find anything between 40 to 100% of contamination on the surface of these cell phones. And again, these are all nosocomial pathogens or multi-drug resistant. The takeaway from the studies in general is that these mobile devices do create an opportunity for cross-contamination in healthcare. Another interesting finding is that device hygiene compliance is actually really poor among healthcare workers. They do find that actually implementing a disinfection strategy of these devices can significantly reduce contamination load, and their role should really be reconsidered as part of the infection transmission chain. But how does it translate in clinical settings? If you think of these phones, they are often used between patient contact. As I just mentioned, we know that device hygiene as hand hygiene compliance can be quite poor among healthcare workers. So, and the phones are also going to contact with the face and the region in around the mouth. So that creates an individual risk that puts the patients at risk. If you think of, immunocompromised patients who have an increased susceptibility to acquire infections, and the visitors and the traffic in and out the hospital to the communities that actually extends that risk beyond the hospital. So, in an ideal scenario, we would like to see guidelines for personal hygiene that would incorporate not only hand hygiene before and after contact with the patient, which is recommended by most regulatory bodies, but also that would include mobile device hygiene as part of their program. That is easier said than done. We know that there are many challenges with doing that in practice in healthcare. You mentioned some, Taylor. When you look at the way that typically healthcare workers would be cleaning their cell phones and other smaller devices, they usually use chemical wipes. As you mentioned, Taylor, hospital-grade disinfectant is required, so you can't use just the wipes that you can find in your local grocery store. Those would not work for superbugs, for example. The most manufacturers of smartphones, they do not recommend the use of these chemical wipes because they can damage the screen, the materials of the phone, and even just like the whole electronic. It's not uncommon for us to hear from our clients that sometimes iPads just stop working and they think it's because of the wipes. The wipes itself may require up to 3 minutes contact time to be effective. They generate a lot of waste. They're not recyclable. recyclable, they're not compostable. And I think, another important thing to consider is that occupational exposure to disinfectants. That's just add another layer of exposure. And we know from studies that exposure to disinfectants is associated with poor respiratory health outcomes among healthcare workers and nurses in particular. But really the major challenge is just a lack of formal guidelines. But healthcare workers and administrators alike, they can understand the options, both chemical and physical disinfectants, and they can understand the advantages and disadvantages, and make an informed decision of what may work in their setting, their hospital. We've seen firsthand those challenges. We actually work closely with our clients to see if our solution could potentially work for them. We typically go and do swabs prior to implementing our solution, and we actually see the same results that we see in the scientific studies. All of these devices, they have huge bacterial load. At least 20% are pathogenic. But when we typically implement as a regimen, what we see after a few weeks is typically we can no longer detect pathogens, or it's just really a really low number. So it can work. Just maybe next slide, please. Yeah, so just here very quickly what, the pathogens that we can find. We talk a lot about bacteria, but you can also find viruses. One study found a 33% rate of rotaviruses on these phones of healthcare workers, which is really concerning. And what it actually looks like if you were just to plate the phone screen on a Petri dish is this, which is not very pleasant to see. And these different types of microorganisms, they have different susceptibility profiles to disinfectants. So this is another thing that is important for, again, administrators and healthcare workers to understand. And that's just based on the microorganisms structure as well as the mechanism of action of the disinfectant. So for example, chemical disinfectants will work by destroying usually the cell wall or interfering with metabolism, while physical disinfectants will have different mechanisms of action. UVC will impact the genetic material, so DNA, RNA. We use a concept that is called the disinfection hierarchy, which describes the descending order of susceptibility of these various classes of microorganisms to chemicals. We find that it applies very well to our technology, UVC as well. So in the figure here, what you can see is just the order from the least susceptible class to the most. So the hardest to kill, the very top, are typically prions and bacterial spores. And at the bottom, you can see some of the, which are considered the easiest to kill. And these are typically viruses such as influenza, so, in H1N1. We've been successful in finding quite high efficacy using UVC against microorganisms that are all the way into this model here. So again, from coronaviruses all the way to C. difficile spores. And just because I mentioned coronavirus, I know COVID is very much on everyone's mind. And just given, the current outbreak, we're getting a lot of questions about SARS-CoV-2 and whether or not our technology can help with that. One thing to keep in mind is that, yes, one of the three primary routes of transmission of COVID-19 is through physical contact with droplets that are deposited on a surface and subsequently transferred to a recipient's respiratory mucosa. So yes, you can use UVC. We actually been conducting some studies with coronavirus, and we've been quite successful in having really high logs and just really inactivating the pathogen. I know, Taylor, you'll be talking about the technology in more detail, so I will hand it back over to you, and I'll be here and happy to take any questions later on. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. And I really appreciate that breakdown. And as you mentioned, I will briefly review some of the work that we've done, not only on testing against SARS-CoV-2, but also on a range of other pathogens. So we've talked a lot about what we're trying to do at CleanSlate and how we're going about, thinking about this problem. Before I tell you more about the product, I want to show you the product. And I'm going to note that because this is a webinar, this will not, we're doing a video two-way webinar streaming to your screen. So this may not come across super crisp. One of the things that we will do as a follow-up, we'll send a link to this video, and everyone, if you want to take a look, and as well as any follow-up information, we'll be happy to provide that. But without any further ado, we will go into this.
In a mobile world, device hygiene and personal hygiene go hand in hand. Here's how you can use CleanSlate UV to keep staff and customers safe. Simply put the items such as your phone, tablet, watch, and other hard-to-clean portable items into the CleanSlate. Close the lid, and the automatic UV process will do the rest. CleanSlate will kill 99.999% of the most dangerous superbugs in just 20 seconds. While your device is being sanitized, you can wash or sanitize your hands to break the chain of infection and ensure that when your device is done being sanitized, you can remove them with clean hands. The lid will open automatically so you don't have to touch the lid and recontaminate your hands in order to retrieve the devices. You can take your devices and go about your day knowing that your phones and hands are now sanitized. CleanSlate UV.
Definitely don't need to do that again, but I hope that came through at least somewhat clear on the webinar piece. And really what that sums up is the incredible value that we've been able to put into this product. And I would say just, with when it comes to our team's approach and our goal of being not only the absolute best product in this market and the best solution available for all of our clients, but in providing a product that will truly break the chain of infection across a range of workflows. And the way that we've gone about doing that is creating a product that is very fast, that won't use corrosive chemicals and destroy touchscreens, by enabling touch-free device removal. That's really, really critical because we don't want the CleanSlate itself to become a vector for contamination. And then we've made sure that it is big enough that it can fit a range of devices. So you can actually do 3 to 4 iPhones at once, or a single iPad, the largest iPad Pro in the market with a large medical grade case attached. And then, tying that all together, we have hospital grade efficacy testing that, is really reflective of real world scenarios. And the technology that we're using to underlie all this is UVC light. For those who may not be very familiar with UVC light, it's in the same sort of spectrum of light that you'd see in like a tanning bed, but at the shorter end of the wavelength. And it's a type of light or a bandwidth of light that is typically reflected by the ozone layer. So it doesn't naturally occur on Earth, or it shouldn't naturally occur on Earth. And because of that, cells have they are susceptible to UVC light, disrupting their genetic material of the DNA or the RNA in the case of viruses, and not allowing them to reproduce. Now, what this actually means for CleanSlate from an efficacy standpoint is that we can achieve high levels of efficacy in a short period of time without needing to pre-wipe devices. And this is incredibly important when it comes to UV solutions and looking at the range of UV solutions out there, because a lot of UV providers, particularly any kind of UV solutions that would do like full room solutions or maybe other countertop solutions that haven't taken as strong of an efficacy approach, is they will assume that devices or that surfaces are pre-wiped prior to them being sanitized, which obviously removes a lot of the dirt and grime and does not make it easy, or does not present a real world reflection of how it will actually be used. And what this means for us in terms of outcomes is when you look at client sites like Island Health or Mount Sinai or Catholic Health, where you have anywhere between 21 to 80% of devices testing positive for pathogenic bacteria before the CleanSlate solutions, you'll see anywhere between a 99 and 100% reduction in pathogenic loads when they're surveyed after CleanSlate implementation. And the Island Health was a great example of this. It was a multi-hospital academic study published in the American Journal of Infection Control that demonstrated not only holistic efficacy for the solution, but ultimately led to a much broader adoption of the technology. And when we talk about an adoption of the technology, what that means for us is CleanSlate being placed in high traffic areas where it can either be on the stand accessory or it can be on a tabletop or a nursing station, and it's really meant to be used frequently throughout the day by large numbers of people, and it's engineered to fit that workflow. And just as an example of how some folks are using CleanSlate, you'll see NICUs like this one in upstate New York using the product as a mandatory aspect of their entry and exit protocols for visitors and staff. You'll see this is the largest NICU in the United States using the product at every single nursing station, as well as all their entranceways and exitsways, again, as a way for staff and visitors to consistently sanitize their device. And one of the big takeaways before I sort of end off is just how much folks actually like using the product, which when you talk about how do you actually get better device hygiene cannot be overstated. The ease of use of the product, the speed of the product, and the flexibility in terms of where it can go and what it can sanitize is incredibly important. And it's led to a very large deployment footprint. We're fortunate to be used and be trusted by a lot of fantastic organizations, both inside and outside healthcare, from leading hospitality and pro sports companies to leading hospitals, including 4 of the top 10 children's hospitals across the United States. So that is it for our presentation today. I'm going to open this up to questions from the audience, and really, thank you so much for joining and listening to not only how we go about thinking about device hygiene and what we've been hearing from the marketplace, but ultimately when we think about how do you create a new normal and how do you begin to integrate device hygiene as regularly as hand hygiene and sort of think of those as two sides of the same coin, how we're going about solving that problem and how we'd like to work with other facilities to solve that for your staff, visitors, and patients as well. So thank you so much, and we will jump over to questions. Oh, wow. Okay, there are a lot of questions here. So this is great. I'm going to just start going down this list because I think that's the best way to approach this. So Cheryl, it's not an initial question from Cheryl, but hi, Cheryl. Great to have you on. Christine asked if the product is CE marked. Yes, the product is CE marked. It is globally certified. And in fact, we've taken a 3-tier approach to product certification and safety. So we have the initial layer of electrical safety, product safety, that is an IEC standard. Then we have EMI and EMC safety to ensure that obviously it's completely safe for a hospital environment and won't interfere with any critical equipment. And then we layer on top of that as well a specific UV safety certification that measures to ensure that no UV light is leaving the product, or that there is no risk of, if there's product damage or an electronic component failure, that the risk of UV exposure is incredibly minimal. So that's very, very important. Jonathan asked, are there any special utility requirements, any maintenance? There is some ongoing preventive maintenance. The bulbs, typical lifespan for the bulbs is between 6 and 11 months, depending on usage. That is the main form of preventive maintenance. The only other, there's one other component, the gas springs, which help control the lid. Those need to be replaced every 1 to 2 years. Again, these are all fairly cost-effective components to replace. And from a total cost of ownership standpoint, most of our clients actually net CleanSlate costing about anywhere between half to 60% of what an equivalent usage of chemical wipes would cost. So from a cost effectiveness standpoint and overall maintenance and total cost of ownership, very effective. And there's no special utility requirements. It'll plug into a 110 volt or 220 volt plug or 230 volt plug, depending on your jurisdiction. I know we have some folks from across the pond on the call today. And Paul asked, Is the quality on his stream not great? Yes, we will be posting a recording of this afterwards, and we'll make sure that that's available to everyone. And yes, the Ruthan asked, can we share a visual poster for end users? This is actually one of the things that I'm incredibly happy with our team on for sort of really advancing in concert with our users over the past 6 months. Is the quality and quantity of our signage options has really increased. So as part of any standard CleanSlate purchase, we have a number of standard signage options that you're entitled to. We've also been working with a number of facilities that have engaged in larger purchases to do completely customized signage, including product wraps, very large point of sale style signage that actually highlights this as a for users coming into like a retail environment or something, or a hospitality environment, as something that can be really, really specifically called out. And that's something that any of our sales managers can provide as well, and very, very happy to do so in terms of examples of that. What is the effect on the device itself? Lower battery life, etc. So we've done extensive testing across a range of devices. Obviously, we haven't tested every single device out there because they're always changing, and that would be impractical. But what I can say is that UVC light does not cause any actual functional damage to the products, which is really, really important. One of the statements that we do make sure is very clear on the device itself, so all users are aware, is that repeated long-term exposure to untreated white plastics, which is essentially something like, for instance, like an AirPods case, so cheaper white plastics, it can accelerate the yellowing process in the same way that if you left the device out in the sun. But we've done extensive internal long-term testing over devices, and there's no functional damage. And that is one of the main reasons why facilities will look at UVC light versus a chemical solution, is that the propensity for chemical disinfectants to not only damage the oleophobic coating on the screens, but for the fibers to actually get into the holes. And the number, I think we have 2 clients that we've recently onboarded where they had RMA'd something like 20% of their tablet fleet because of the impact that chemical devices was having on those. And their trial with CleanSlate saw none of those issues. Fantastic, fantastic results. Erica has asked what the life expectancy of the CleanSlate devices prior to needing to be replaced. Our engineered life expectancy is 5 years. And Ruthan also asked about how often you need to change the bulb. I think I already addressed that, but it's 6 to 11 months depending on usage and the total amount of uptime on the device. So if you have a situation like a hospital entranceway where it's being used 24/7, it's going to be closer to the 6-month mark. If it's being turned off at night, it'll be closer to the 11 mark. And how often, Michael asked, how effective are handheld UVC wands when in comparison to CleanSlate? So I'm not supposed to make any kind of broad overarching statements, and I can't speak directly to any one UVC wand. What I can say is that if UVC light is powerful enough that you can see it, or potentially see it, or use it with your hands, or sort of use it in a wand setting, it is likely not powerful enough to be an active rapid disinfectant. There is one of the innovations of the CleanSlate product is how we keep our lights on all the time. We keep the bulbs on all the time, and we manipulate the UVC light in a way that can reach 360 degrees of a device, but we can do so in a way that never exposes the user to UVC light. And that's very important because at the end of the day, UVC light, like any kind of disinfectant, can be dangerous if misused. And we've gone through extensive safety certifications, testing, all that stuff to make sure that that doesn't happen. But there are a lot of products out there that frankly have not gone through that diligence. And I would just say in general, buyer beware, but that's obviously a very general statement. We have a question on aging of the plastics on equipment and studies, as well as the whether we need to limit the number of cleanings. So this is something that we actually have done. We have done internal research on. It's one of the areas that we're doing a lot of additional research on, particularly as we continue to expand both outside of healthcare and therefore see more and more devices that are coming up. But as we continue to see an increase in the types of materials being used, for instance, silicone on smartwatches and how that reacts. And that is something, by the way, that we have tested, and it's fine. So we do have a couple of those studies, and we're happy to share that as part of the sort of formal evaluation process if you're looking at purchasing. What I will say is that it is typically only untreated white plastics that will see any substantial issue. And again, that's where you're talking, 200-300 cycles, where if it's then being back to back to back every single day, you may start to see a bit of discoloration. But the important thing there is that it's cosmetic. There's no physical damage to the product in the same way that you'd see with the type of wear and tear from chemical solutions or bleach-based wipes and that kind of thing. Matthew asked, what are the top 3 locations or departments that the CleanSlate is currently used? I'm guessing the NICU is number 1. What are number 2 and 3? This is a very good question, and it's actually one that, frankly, I'd have to get updated stats from our team, because we've grown so quickly over the past 6 months that my stats will be out of date. I will say that traditionally it was the NICU and critical care more generally. Recently, though, we have found there has been such a need to tackle device hygiene in every single area of the hospital. This is not a one department story. This is a full hospital challenge, and this is a full hospital story. I will say that areas such as critical care, but also ORs, as well as just public entranceways are all very, very common initial use cases, but almost all of our deployments end up basically expanding over time, because when folks get in there, they see how easy it is to use, they see how quick it is, and they see the impact. It gets, very, very, gets a lot of traction very quickly. Christine asked, will you have an EU distributor? We are working on that right now. If you have, the EU obviously is a very large jurisdiction. We have a fantastic partner in Peak-Ryzex in the UK. Outside of that, we are working more on a country by country basis and not looking right now at the entire EU. If you have a specific country that you're looking in, again, our product is globally certified and we can accommodate all the power requirements across the continent. Please get in touch with us and we can add that under a priority list. And we may also be working already with a vendor on a trial basis that we can put you in touch with. Luvo asked about the VR reality headset like Oculus or HTC Vive fitting inside the cleaner. I'm actually going to dodge this question and say that it should be, we should review that on a case-by-case basis. We have had internal results, like positive results, testing on headsets, but the reason that I'm hesitant to give any kind of overarching answer is that it almost depends on a model by model basis, because it's very dimensional and it's very much based on the architecture of that specific headset and whether it will fit in the CleanSlate tray, but then also what the optics of actually getting UVC light onto that to the inside of it are. UVC light works via line of sight. So what it cannot see, it cannot kill. And that's always our biggest concern before we give any yes or no on any new items such as a headset. Unit surface cleaning, any recommendations? Is there any concern for using household for unit housing cleaning? So no, we've designed the CleanSlate to stand up to the rigors of hospital level of disinfection for surfaces. So the CleanSlate itself can be wiped down with bleach wipes, accelerated hydrogen peroxide, isopropyl alcohol, whatever your facility deems necessary. The only caveat to that is that we don't recommend wiping the inside of the tray more than once a month with chemical solutions, because it can leave some residue, and more importantly, the tray itself is basically self-disinfecting. It just often needs to be wiped down with a damp microfiber cloth to reduce any to remove any biofilm that may build up over time. But even that is typically quite minimal. Ultrasound probes, again, it can depend. What I should say is that CleanSlate is not a Class 2 medical device, so we cannot outwardly claim to be we are not a primary disinfection method for any Class 2 medical devices or anything that would be considered a semi-critical or critical equipment. That being said, we do have a number of facilities that use it as a secondary method of additional disinfection for a range of probe-like devices. Again, it would be helpful to, if that's a question that you have a specific model question on, and again, it depends on whether it would be touching any open mucous membranes. If it is, the answer would be no. If it's not, then the answer is it could be used as a secondary disinfectant. And do phones need to have their cases removed? Great question. The answer is No. In fact, we explicitly, one of the 3 very simple sets of instructions is that we want people to keep their phones, their cases attached to their phone. And the reason for that is that when you look at the data around device hygiene and you look at where the bacteria is actually being housed, it's on the case because that's what you're touching. So we want to make sure that we sanitize the surfaces that can act as the vector for contamination. The only exception to that is that we do explicitly instruct people to make sure that their screen is visible. And the reason we do that is that we want, in the case if you have a wallet case, we want them to open the wallet case and expose as much of the device and the case as possible. And finally, Michael asked about N95 respiratory mask effectiveness. So this is something that we have actually recently implemented, a mask cycle option on the product. And this is what it does is it extends our 20-second cycle time to a 1-minute cycle time. And the reason that we do this is because that will produce the amount of UVC light that has been recommended by numerous industry associations. And I am very wary of citing exactly which governmental agency has done it because I cannot remember right off the top of my head, but 1 millijoule per centimeter squared has been recognized as the standard needed to enable the safe reuse of N95 masks. We are actually in the process of also doing independent testing on that, specifically with SARS-CoV-2 to understand the impact of different masks, different materials. One of the many pieces of thought leadership that we're doing, but that option is available as a way, on units that are being shipped right now. So with that, I think that reaches the end of our questions. Thank you so much to everyone here who's been part of this webinar. I really appreciate the questions and for taking the time today. And thank you very much to Dr. Carolina Koutras. As you got a great glimpse of there, she is a fantastic clinical researcher. We are extremely excited to have her on board and leading our clinical research practice at CleanSlate as we look at, again, how do we long-term ensure that no one gets sick from the germs on a mobile device, and everything that we do comes back to that. So thank you so much for joining today. Really appreciate the time and hope that everyone here stays safe, stays healthy. And if there's anything you'd like to reach out to, please do not hesitate at all to reach out to any of our CleanSlate reps or contact us on our website. Thank you so much.